When I was about 24 years old, my cousin Charlie got throat cancer. He wasn't really my cousin, he was my dad's cousin, but for whatever reason I always called him Cousin Charlie. Anyway, he and his wife lived up around St. Louis, and he had finally been recovering from cancer. He went to stay in his estate in mainland Hawaii. At one point he needed somebody to babysit his house in St. Louis, and I volunteered. Fast forward, I'm staying at his place by myself. Now we're talking about satellite internet and television slower than a snail. I found myself entrailing in a Lord of the Rings marathon and proceeding to stay up until 2:30 AM. Changing the channel meant that whatever channel I was flicking through, it would choose between 4 stations down from my selection, so I was hesitant to even change it. The marathon ends and I proceed to make some green tea. Ugh. That's when I hear it. A distant scream calling across from the valley below. Now I knew that it was a human scream, but for some reason I refused to believe it. The thing about houses from St. Louis is that you have a lot of room between your neighbours, I mean like 2 miles apart from each other. If somebody played music on the other side of the hill, you'd have no problem hearing it. Now I thought maybe they screamed because they were watching a scary film, or perhaps playing a pool game. I don't really know, but my imagination was doing its best to not over-exaggerate. About 2 minutes had gone by. I passed it off at this time, getting lost in the infomercials. That's when I heard something familiar to a firecracker, but then I heard it multiple times. Something didn't seem right, so I grabbed the nearest blunt object and headed upstairs. Now my cousin Charlie has a 360-degree second deck, which I proceeded to go to and take watch on with a fire poker. Like that would do me any good. I listened, but I could only hear the wind. I wound up actually falling asleep in one of the rocking chairs and waking up again about 40 minutes later. What I found out later from Charlie is that a man who got into a big argument with his wife, he shot her as she ran from the house. I also found out later because I was the only one who had left the outside lights on. She apparently ran towards me but died from her wounds about 60% of the way there. I used to live in rural Panama in a community that had no electricity. The whole town is inside by sundown, at around 7 PM. By 9 PM, everybody's fast asleep. So one night I'm outside at around 11 PM taking photos of the stars. I have to turn my headlamp off for a while just so the camera can take photos. It usually takes about 30 to 150 seconds at a time. So after about 150 seconds of almost complete darkness, I finish the photo. I then turn my headlamp back on and look at my camera just to adjust the settings and take one more shot. Now one time when I turned the headlamp back on again, I turned and saw a pair of eyes about 15 feet away from me just staring. I got friends who have worked setting up camera traps throughout the country, and I've seen picture evidence that there's still several types of big cats alive and well in the area. I leaned down to pick up some rocks, look back up. The eyes are now gone. Now my house is about 100 feet away. I then do my best to turn my handful of rocks and dinty tripods into weapons and just go for my house as quick as I possibly can. I never went back out that night to take any photos. I have no idea where that big cat went. I'm sure it was close to me, and had I have stayed there, I'd probably have been dead. This summer, I was out in the dark canyon wilderness of Utah. After about 2 weeks of driving and backpacking around the country alone, the plan was a 7-day trip, and after a few days of setbacks, I was on my last night. By this time, I was already a little scared of the dark, but that's just what happens when you're your only company for 3 weeks. Anyway, on the 6th day, I found an awesome elk halter and put it on my shoulders for about a mile into the day's hike. Now, as anybody who's poorly packed a pack will attest, just slapping 15 pounds on top of your pack is a really bad idea. About halfway through my planned death march, my hip was getting really sore, and I blew through my water. I decided it'd be best to stop and get some water early. Luckily I found a few puddles of dryish riverbed nearby the camp. I started boiling some water when it struck me. If there's skanky water here, then there must be some fresh water further up, so I did decide to travel further up. Just as the canyon boxed out a little, spring water filled the bed with deliciously cold, refreshing water. I drank on my hands and knees before realising that I didn't bring my water bottles. Whatever I hiked, the half-mile back or so to the camp was just grueling. I don't know why, it just felt weird. Now on my trip back, I felt very vulnerable and uncomfortable. Every little rustle at the bushes set me off. I could hear birds calling in the distance, and even that scared me. I kept looking back for something following me. Now I can only describe my emotion as pure terror. It got to the point where I picked up a branch just in case I encountered a cougar or something. I still kept telling myself that it was just paranoia and that I'm fine and that I'm not being watched. I finally got to the water and filled up my backpack and started on my return journey. I was constantly looking over my shoulder. Now the feeling of unease was still with me as I made my way back down to the clutch. It was there that I come upon a fresh mountain lion print. It was directly between the two prints that I had made. Now it's one thing to think your fears are unfolded through paranoia. It's far, far worse to know that they're actually true. When I was in school, I went to a summer camp. We normally had to sleep in separate cabins, but as it was such a nice night outside, we were allowed to go and sleep out in the stars. We immediately went away from the supervision and went straight to the other camp. Upon successfully reaching their campsite and being dumbfounded as what to do, we decided to throw miscellaneous items into the fire, creating subsequential explosions, and that was a good icebreaker, I guess. Unfortunately, due to our brilliance, we were quickly brought back to our campsite. Not being discouraged, we decided to rejoin their camp again. As we began to leave for their site though, we heard an extremely loud bang. It sounded like a high caliber rifle, then followed by another. Then, silence. We become paralysed as to what to do. Was it from their site? We're all too afraid to find out. We could see a flash in the distance running around the area. I only remembered lying quietly, barely being able to get back to sleep, joking that it was a gunshot. The next morning when we woke up, we were very confused as to what happened. I actually found out though. A man had shot his ex at his house right by the campsite that we're staying at. I grew up in the Arctic. In the town that I lived in, as long as it was a clear night, it was an extremely normal occurrence to see all sorts of strange lights moving across the sky. Keep in mind the winter is long in the Arctic, which means longer amounts of times being spent under the stars. It's really quite beautiful, as long as you don't mind the cold so much. Now sometimes I would drive a snowmobile a few kilometers out of town, shut it down, and just lay down on the snowmobile, looking up at the majesty of all the stars. The only disturbing thing about this place was the silence of it all, and maybe the occasional breeze, which could sound kind of weird. Now the northern lights are also common up here. Now it doesn't happen every day, but when it does, you don't forget it. Now on one night in particular, without asking my parents as it was their snowmobile, I decided to go out on one of my midnight drives. I decided to go a few kilometers out of town, just to get out of the light pollution. I shut the machine off and settled down in the hill and found a really good spot. It wasn't all that interesting of a scene though. There were some satellites passing here and there, and some relatively boring activity. I could see some of the magnetic field though. And then, I started noticing a clicking sound. At first I thought it was the sound of the snowmobiles cooling down, as the engine sometimes does that, but the source definitely wasn't coming from that direction. My next thought was that maybe there's an animal nearby, and you've just got to watch out if there are ones because you don't want to mess with wild animals out here. But the clicking is far too regular for an animal to produce it. It was fairly mechanical sounding. And again, the source of the sound isn't coming from anywhere to me laterally, it was coming from up. So I looked up to determine what the hell it was. I see what I always see, stars northern lights, a lazy satellite crossing the sky, all normal stuff. But just before I dismissed it all and began heading home, I noticed something strange in the aurora. There are these rather strong points of light. I ignored them at first, thinking that they're oddly symmetrical stars, but this proved false. They're definitely getting brighter. I kept staring at this, fascinated as they grew stronger and brighter, yet still trying to figure out if this was actually the source of the noise. The clicking sound is getting louder and louder and more prominent, almost like somebody started tapping a pen on the desk, then started hitting bowling balls on the side of my head. Then, it stops. The lights are gone, the clicking is not heard. I'm fine, though petrified. I jump back on the snowmobile thinking that I'm going crazy. The machine takes a while to start up. I'm beginning to worry, but soon it actually managed to start up, and I'm heading back to town quickly. Now as I'm driving back, several plausible scenarios are running through my head. I'm thinking maybe it's a helicopter and I just didn't notice it, or maybe it's some strange behaviour from the lights. As I pull up to my house, I notice that all of the lights are off. Strange. It wasn't that late when I left. I opened the outer door as quietly as possible, removed my winter gear and entered quietly, really quiet. My parents are teachers and are usually up late watching TV or doing stuff. All I'm thinking is that I have to go to bed without anybody realising. I knew that if I was under my covers they wouldn't expect anything, and that's what I do. All of a sudden, everything makes sense. The engine hard to start, stiff, rather chilly. Nobody up when I was gone, what felt like a relatively short period of time. It was almost 11 PM when I left, and now it was creeping up to 6 AM. I stood staring at the clicking lights for almost 7 hours. Some friends and I would take my truck up into the mountains during winter time and tow somebody on a tub across the snow. That sounds really fun. We dropped the tailgate in my old Ford, and a few of the guys would sit in the back of my truck with one of those candlelight spotlights. When I was driving, it'd be fun to make really wide turns in the dark so the person in the tub didn't have the luxury of the headlights or the tail lights illuminating where they were going. The person in the bed of the truck with the spotlight would be funny and shine the light clear to the side, so that way they really couldn't see anything. Now on one night in particular, a really bad snowstorm was rolling in, so we headed up to the usual spot and it was dark that night. A friend was on the tub. I was driving watching my mirrors as I'd swing in wide enough so he had very little light. The guy on the spotlight also shined clear so he couldn't see much. Just as I checked my mirrors, I made eye contact with a guy dressed in jeans, a red t-shirt and a blazed orange baseball cap. As we made eye contact, I lost control of my body for about 5 seconds, but it truly felt like an eternity. I stopped the truck and turned it around and asked the guys if they'd seen him. They all said no, so I flipped the truck around and put the high beam on and they shined the spotlight all over. I got out and looked for footprints in the snow. We saw nothing. That night we went back home and I told my dad about the weird experience that I had. He didn't think anything of it. It was about a week later though that I heard on the news they reported a body in the area close to where we had been searching. They were asking for any tips. My old man convinced me to call the police and let them know that we were up there and that we saw the guy. So I called the police and they said that they'd send an investigator over. He come over to our house. I recalled the experience saying it happened 7 days earlier. As soon as I said that, the investigator said, "Are you sure on your date?" "Yeah, I'm positive," as he showed me a picture of the body that they found wearing the exact same clothes that I had seen. He then told me that the body had been up there for at least a month, so I must have just seen something. It turns out that there was a man who suffered from mental illnesses and he actually committed suicide there 1 month prior to when we had seen him. I was in solitude at sea. When I was about 23, I was a dock hand for a boat rental club. I bought myself a 27-foot Catalan sailboat and lived on it at the docks for about a year or so while I worked for the boat club. Now, out of boredom, I would often get drunk on 101 proof alcohol and go out for a late night joyride. Now, as I did so, my main sail tears and my atomic 4 engine breaks down. As this happens, I started drifting quite a long way out. I quickly drop my anchor. I then power up my backup batteries for my anchor light. I bed down in my 4th berth to wait for the morning for my co-workers to come and tow me back. I'm only about a mile offshore though at the moment, which I guess is a long way if you've only got sea around you. Well, out of the channel in about 60 foot of open water. It's as I'm there though that I hear a rhythmic thudding on the bottom of the boat. It was like somebody was doing a semi-fast snare roll with their fist closed against my hull. I mean, it was really like somebody was there. Now, there was nothing in my head that could have possibly made that sound besides somebody being under my boat and beating on it. I went topside with my flashlight to investigate. I literally couldn't see anything, and the sound continued on and off for about another 15 minutes. It was a calm night and there wasn't really big waves or anything at this point. I visually couldn't see anything that could have done that. It came from midship, so it couldn't have been the motor or anything. I checked on the sides and there still was nothing. Now, it's left me pretty shaken up because I still can't figure out what possibly made that sound, especially not that loud. It was so precise and I could feel the bumps hitting against a fiberglass hull. I eventually got back to sleep and made it back to the docks the following morning. I drove on my boat the next day to check for anything, and again I found nothing. Needless to say, that was the last time that I went out alone at night. It's just where we truly don't know what's out there that really gets me with the ocean. The fact that there could have been literally anything under there making that sound that night. I have an older guy friend who grew up in the 1950s in Alaska, where his dad is a bush pilot. So one day, they're flying around just for a nice day, and suddenly, the entire sky goes red. Like completely red, the clouds included, and there was no radio. At the time, he's old enough to understand what's going on, but still young enough that they don't really talk about it. His dad continues flying, for hours, but they don't even say a word. We're still thinking that the Cold War had just ended in the thermonuclear holocaust. It wasn't out of the question. Alaska was close enough to Russia, and it was at the height of the Cold War. The sky is still forever red. Finally, they started running out of fuel. They have to land. The biggest problem they have is where the radios are not working. They can't let anybody know that they're about to land, so they have to go for an emergency landing. And they made it down perfectly. No hiccups or bumps or anything. The airport is besides itself pretty normal, and some of the crew comes to help them out. "What's going on?" his dad asked. "You have no idea how lucky you are. A volcano just went off and you're flying through the debris." So this happened 3 years ago when I was living with my parents in Mesity, Wyoming. It was a super small and secluded place where we lived. It was Halloween and my parents decided to decorate the house, and we expected maybe 3 kids total to show up to the house. There's a few more houses a few miles away, and parents usually drive their kids around. So it gets to about 8. I'm sat up in the chair with the candy, and I figured that nobody else would be coming now, so I just started eating on it. I'm in the basement where there's no windows and very little sound can get out, and it's about 11 PM now. All the lights upstairs are shut off because everybody's going to bed. I then suddenly hear a knock at the side door, which no one ever knocks at. I go upstairs and the floodlight, which usually turns on automatically, didn't turn on, so I flip the other light on and it lights up the basketball area. I see that there's a person in one of those old man masks and with the crazy hair just standing there. He's just looking at the house. He sprints up back to where the patio is. I then hear loud banging on the back windows. Honestly, it's the loudest kicking and knocking that I've ever heard. I rush over and the person is just staring still. Then he runs away and I don't hear anything for about another 5 minutes or so. I then started hearing the doorknob to the main door being forcefully opened. I ran upstairs to the bedroom and went to crawl inside the attic. I immediately dialed 911. This is the first time that I've ever had to dial it, and I didn't know what to expect, but the operator didn't even seem very shocked or wanting to send over a car quickly. I remembered repeating my address like 12 times, and the lady kept saying, "Calm down, sir." She wants me to stay on the line, but I'm terrified that they're going to locate my voice. I hung up quickly. I then heard the doorknob being slammed against. It sounded like they had a hammer or something. I'm now having a full-on panic attack, and I'm wheezing, trying to get the air. Then I hear the side door, original door, being kicked super hard. At this point, I'm shaking so bad that the dust from the floorboards is actually flying up into the air. I hear a window smash, and I immediately know he's going to get in. I hold my breath, which actually made my wheezing worse. I think I'm going to die. I listen to hear the footsteps. I listen to hear anything, but nothing. The actual amount of time that I spent up there was about 16 minutes. I swear it was an hour though. An officer showed up and pounded on the door. I ran downstairs and flipped the door open. I told him everything, and they sent a backup sheriffs here as well. They all kept saying that a friend was probably just trying to scare me. The thing is, I have literally no friends here. None. They looked around the house and wrote some bullshit down, and nothing really come of it. Since I've left, I've never been the same. I literally can't sleep without all the lights on and a 45 on my dresser. I just wish that really the cops could have took all of this a lot more seriously. Living this secluded, you don't know if they're going to come back. When I was 15, I was at a Boy Scout trip in Illinois. My tent mate was sick, so he went home on Tuesday. Wednesday night, I'm alone in my tent, and I heard what sounded like thuds. There was between 10 and 12 of them every minute or so. I thought little of it and went to sleep. Thursday night, again alone. I needed to go out at about 1 AM to use the bathroom. As I get up to go, I suddenly hear something behind me. I turn around. Somebody's chopping wood with a trooper's axe at 1 in the morning. They stop, stare directly at me, smile, then walk away into the woods. I have never been so scared in my life. I heard laughter accompanying the chopping later that night. I reported this incident to the staff. They did an investigation. It revealed that the others had heard the same thing as me, and to this day, 5 years later, the case has come up empty. The guy hasn't reappeared or anything, and it was confirmed not to be a camper or staff member. Now the thing that gets to me is, we were truly in the middle of nowhere. Why the hell would somebody be out there that far away from everybody? Well, not that far from us.